Seat and we'll start in a few minutes. Welcome back. Bienvenue à nouveau.
Welcome back.
Or your tour, or your recent purchases. In the case of la boutique, elle va être ouverte également pendant.
The shop will also be open during the cocktail, and the kiosks will still be there to visit, as well as the exhibition on the ground floor and downstairs. I invite you to tweet GLAM #2019 or ask questions about the values of GLAM, and we'll use those questions to improve the story we want to tell about the sector. Without any further ado, let's welcome the Executive Director of the Ontario Association of Museums, who will introduce our next speaker.
Bonjour.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, Ms. Laurando, Mr. Roy, and of course our colleagues from the Association of Canadian Museums. Thank you for this GLAM Summit, and a special thank you to Mr. Berthiaume for your leadership, your work, your efforts for a greater collaboration in the sector of GLAM. So this is after lunch. I apologize. And you generally accepted our invitation to the 2017 conference, which was very important and really launched a reflection that was continued the next year. And I would like to recognize also in this room two colleagues who were part of a panel at that conference, the Ontario archivist, Mr. John Roberts, and Ms. Vic Rebels from Toronto Public Library. So the conversation is going on, and I thank you for that. I now have the pleasure to introduce Dr. Charles Ekman. Dr. Ekman is the Dean and Librarian of the University of Miami, a position that he's been occupying since December 2013.
President and board member of the International Association of University Libraries. He has also served on the boards of directors for the Association of Southeastern Research Libraries, the Canadian Association of Research Libraries, and Canadian Research Knowledge Network. He holds a Master of Library and Information Science degree from UC Berkeley, a PhD in politics from Princeton, and a BA in political science from Indiana University. Monsieur Ekman a joué un rôle.
Mr. Ekman played a decisive role in the first summit that brought a stronger collaboration between libraries, archives, and museums. That summit brought together at the University of Miami in January 2016 the people in charge of the Arts Museum and libraries of 14 universities to explore the challenges and opportunities to create a sustainable collaboration between museums and libraries.
2016 was the inspiration for the very first Canadian Summit, taking it to the streets, the value of libraries, archives, and museums, held in Ottawa in December 2016. It just seemed to make sense to invite Dr. Ekman, and we are delighted that he's joining us today for the third event of this nature here in Canada, Taking It to the People, 2019 Summit on the Value of Libraries, Galleries, Libraries, and Museums. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Dr. Charles Ekman. Monsieur Ekman.
Thank you for that warm introduction, and I'm delighted to be here with you today to speak about this important issue. I'm also very appreciative to the leadership of the National Library and Archives Quebec, Library and Archives Canada, and the Canadian Museum Association for pulling this together and for the advice from the Planning Committee to help me think about what would be most useful to discuss. I do want to acknowledge the leadership that exists here with regard to this issue at the national level, because it's rather unusual and inspiring from outside to see the history and the building of excitement around the potential of collaborating across these four sectors and potentially more eventually. These are some of the things you're very familiar with now in terms of the history of that trajectory. From where we've been, the Miami Summit was mentioned. This summit actually emerged out of a concern, possibly even a crisis, that was expressed by the Crest Foundation, which had established 16 regional art collections by gift of the philanthropist who built the collection, to sort of jumpstart those collections at a regional basis, and a concern that from the foundation's perspective, those collections were not achieving impact in the way in which that had been envisaged originally with the gifts. And they were particularly concerned that they were not making the connections at university and college level that could be made with other organizations like the libraries. And there was a bit of a concern because a lot of the accrediting process in the United States around higher education ignored museums, but included libraries. And so the idea was to find a way to create collaboration and better strengths across the two sectors. The Crest Foundation and the Mellon Foundation supported that first summit, and it was a great summit. There's a white paper that resulted from it, reflecting the experiences and the findings of the 14 institutional partners that participated. We had a director from the museum, the art museum, and the library at each of the 14 institutions. And then there was a follow-on in Oberlin, Ohio, just last June, and that white paper just came online on Friday, so just in time for this. You may be the first one seeing this, because I don't think they've announced it. So, and I'm hoping, by the way, one of the things I've learned is that art directors are able to present and communicate with the aesthetic of art and the content of art in a way that library directors aren't always able to. So I'm hoping that a version of this presentation, which does have a lot of text, will be available for anyone who wants to review it later, because I'm going to start moving fairly quick so that we can keep on with the agenda. So it's not a new concept, breaking down silos in cultural organizations. This is from an OCLC report in 2008 that talked about what it would take to create greater cohesion, coherence within the operating practices of galleries, libraries, archives, and museums. And it followed a sort of a notion of gradual socialization and engagement within the organization on the operational side, from contact through cooperation, coordination, collaboration, and ending with a convergence. The Miami partnership that started with the summit and continued because the Mellon Foundation found the concepts and the potential here very fruitful, and began investing in some of the institutions that attended the summit who had ideas, and Miami was one of the first. And we proposed and were given a grant for 4 years, and that, well, I'm going to get to that in a second. But first, to tell you a little bit about the two organizations that are involved in it. The Low Art Museum was established in 1950, fairly large collection, permanent galleries, 12 temporary exhibits per year, a lot of other activities, 15 staff. And the director there frequently uses this word, and I don't think there's a French equivalent, but just to leave it to say that this means agile in a scarce resource environment. And so the libraries on the right-hand side, from the founding of the university, 6 libraries on 3 campuses, collection size. We have 3 distinctive collection programs, our Cuban Heritage Collection, Special Collections, and the University Archives. We have a conservation lab, digital production lab, and creative studio, 3 exhibit galleries, and a larger number of faculty and staff. Although our staff will tell me that just because it's large doesn't mean that we have enough. So in any event, I don't have an equivalent to Jill Dupuis' description. So as I mentioned, we applied for and received a grant to conduct a 4-year project oriented broadly around the concept of object-centered learning. The concept was that we would be awarding mini grants to faculty-sponsored projects around research, pedagogy, and public programming. Thus far, we're sort of right in the middle of the 4-year period. We've allocated this amount in 6 rounds. And we have 2 fellows that have been hired, one that's oriented towards the Low Art Museum, an academic engagement fellow, and a conservation fellow who works in our preservation lab in the library. And I'll go through this quickly. When we set this up, we wanted to have a very sort of rigorous process for allocating the funding. We wanted to make sure that the faculty saw this as a serious project, could see it as something that would seed fund something that would be become part of their research agenda broadly, and they could seek larger funding support for. So all of this is online on our project website, create.miami.edu. So, but all elements of this were designed both to create a sense of seriousness and also to align with the university's strategic plan. And part of this also was to really kind of socialize the concept of what unique objects in the Low Museum and library collections could be potentially for research and teaching, what it could mean. So we wanted to make sure that we had ambassadors, that we had faculty who were on board with this, that could promote the awareness of this project, could one day submit their own proposals, and could ensure that it was seen as an interdisciplinary project. So each year we have a new set of faculty assigned from each of the schools and colleges, or ideally all of the schools and colleges. Not every year do we hit all of them, but we've hit a pretty good representative set of them. Some of them do come back because they're not allowed to apply for grant during the time that they're involved in overseeing the project in this fashion or engaging with it. They are the people who also participate with us on the peer review project of all project proposals. So with the planning committee's advice, I picked 5 out of the 12 projects to talk a little bit about, and I'll go quickly through here. The first one is one that was developed by faculty in the School of Medicine around visual thinking strategies, which is a strategy that had been in operation for 3 years prior to the availability of the grant. It's a participatory process that involves teaching students to think carefully, to look closely, to listen carefully, and to communicate artfully. And the project that was proposed was designed to assess whether this strategy that had been going on with some MD, PhD students for several years was actually effective in any way. And I'm pulling out extracts from the research statement here that described it. The project proceeded in the Low Art Museum, and the findings were that, in fact, after comparing a control group within the project with others, that there was actually clear evidence of a change and a more articulate or accurate description of EKG patterns. They used EKG strips and descriptions of that, physician descriptions of what they were seeing as the test. And they did pre and post test, and they could see strong differences, which pointed to the potential validity of using this method at a broader level. So it was a small project, but impactful from our perspective. The second one I've selected is one about Afro-Caribbean religion, proposed by Professor Kay Ramsey in the Department of History. This is more of a classic kind of library engagement proposal. It involved working through, with a student class, a seminar, use of materials in our special collections and Cuban heritage collection. And it tied into a faculty member's research interest, but part of it was also to expose the students to, they each had a research project. They also participated in digitization of the content. There was a guest speaker who came in as part of this project. And I pulled out some of the more kind of artful components of the Cuban heritage collection and special collections for this. This is from a pamphlets collection, so a lot of the information that's contained in it is not reflected in this element, but this is part of what you will find when you're looking through library collections, often is unexpected presence of art. So the Cuban Heritage Collection is one of the most important collections at the University of Miami. It was formed through the activity of 5 emigre librarians from Cuba in the 1960s, and it's really developed to be a rich resource. One of their most important resources are the papers of Lydia Cabrera, an anthropologist and ethnologist who studied Afro-Caribbean religions. And so these are some of the elements. This on the left here from her collection, and another from a collection of posters related to the Orishas collection. This is a third project, Animating Antiquities, proposed by Dr. Karen Matthews in the art department, and it involved working with some of the objects in the Low Art Museum's collection, having students get exposed to them and build 3D models, have interactive activities and present them in a community engagement context. So you'll see in here the models that they created, very proud of them, and the way in which they engaged the community at a capstone event for that project. They also placed their 3D images and models online in this course file, and we're moving those files into our digital repository. And I'm going to try something here, and I'm not sure it's going to work, so if it doesn't work, nothing lost. But I just want to see if there's a chance it will work, because this is, I think, online. So yes. So this is an example of one of those objects that they created. And you can see what they've done is they've annotated it, different elements of it. You can move the object. You can see different elements of it. That for the artifact, this is really important, and for building a future digital collection that might be shareable across space, extremely important. So that's an example of one of the tangible outcomes from the project. Placing history and augmented reality tour on Coconut Grove. Coconut Grove is one of the original settlements in South Florida near Miami. It's a It's an important place historically, and one of our faculty members in communication who's very expert at digital technologies and gamification and GIS promotes this, and he's working on it right now. I'm putting this in because I was requested that there's really no outcome yet, but it's has quite a potential for really doing something quite different around tourism and learning for visitors and for students and others about a community space. This is sort of just a little bit of emblematic of what's going on in Coconut Grove. It was the earliest Black community in Florida. The architecture there reflects the Bahamian roots of some of its inhabitants early on. There's pioneer architecture, quote unquote pioneer architecture that's present, that's part of a monument system. The lower left is the Coconut Grove Playhouse, which was built in 26 and became a major part of the Miami art scene, theater scene. The first US premiere showing of Waiting for Godot, Samuel Beckett's play, occurred there. They're quite proud of it. The last project I'm going to show, again at the advice of the committee, is another one documenting diversity and democracy in Brazil. This one is centered on a collection of a very broad collection of magazines, zines, pamphlets, and books and journals that was built by a poet in Brazil over the course of several decades. And her collection is sort of a testament to the notion of opposition and counterculture in Brazil during the years in which it covered, the 1960s through the 80s. And so the proposal is to expose that collection in a very systematic way through a class, through a symposium, and through a digital humanities project that would be tied into it. We're very excited about it. Here we're trying to show it off in a different way that's artistically compelling. And then here's an example of one of the items that is in the collection. And if you're following Brazil, you would know that this is probably something that is going to be very contemporaneous in terms of what happens at that symposium and what might happen with what the class is going to do with this collection. So now I'm going to shift slightly, because while these projects have been going on and we've been thinking about the projects and making sure that they're being successful, a faculty member in anthropology initiated the concept of an exhibit that would be held at the Low Art Museum that would profile cartography and the artistic merit of maps and mapping, and also highlight identity and definition of the Caribbean and the nations that are part of the Caribbean. And that project went alongside of all of this and dovetailed at certain points. Because we had kind of created a sense and a culture of collaboration, there was a lot of excitement about throwing resources from the library at this project, and we did in a big way. And it, I think, became better because of it. It certainly, the director of the Low will say that the opening for the exhibit was the most well-attended opening of any exhibit in the history of the Low Art Museum, and that's saying something. It was also tied in conjunction with the Miami Map Fair, so that might have had a little bit to do with it, and there were certainly a lot of stakeholders, so that certainly had a lot to do with it. The other thing that came as a part of this was the creation of a catalog, an exhibition catalog, that was a series of thematic essays, and they were presented in parallel text in French, Spanish, Creole, and English. And it was included photography that was created by the library's creative services unit. The translations were edited by different librarians, and it just won 2 awards we just discovered in different categories. One from the Association of College Research Libraries Rare Books and Manuscripts section, and another from the ALA PR Exchange Award. So I think it kind of tells the story that when we work together, we can probably achieve greater ends and outcomes than if we work within our own silos. And then this is sort of a midpoint, and I've tried to throw together. We're really sort of working hard to make this happen, and so we haven't sat down to talk together about what we've learned. This is really more what I've learned. So we've integrated the metadata for the Low Art Museum's holdings into the library's online system. So we're creating a cultural resources catalog. We discovered in the course of this through discussions with a faculty member about including their personal collection that they use as a teaching collection and a research collection of marine invertebrate species into this project somehow, into the cultural resources available to everyone that has access to the University of Miami and its collection, which would be everyone. We've also discovered, at least I've learned, that there's a potentially limitless, and I'm a little scared about that, need for access to some of the services that the library's developed over the years that have been driven mostly around what we know and what we can do and what we do for ourselves. So, but once they discover that you do digital production, web, and preservation services, and I should probably add metadata services to this, the interest grows very strongly. So we're trying to figure out ways to manage that and to think about how we would manage requests for this in an environment in which we didn't have funding provided by the Mellon Foundation. We also have in the library a strong creative services group, and they are now working routinely with the Low Art Museum on various initiatives, not just tied to these. The other thing is cultural transformation. This relates to the earlier conversation, I think, about how do you get shared engagement in these things that go below the director level. I work very well with the art museum director. We have a really great relationship, and we always knew what we were doing with this, and it was all about collaboration. But in the initial phases, I think some of our near administrators were wondering, well, are they reporting to us, or are we reporting to them, or how long is this going to go on? And I mean, those kinds of questions that reflect fear and risk aversion. And so what we've tried to do is model the notion that this is what we're doing now, what we should be doing, what we have to do for the future. And we really want to make sure that that is the behavior we're exemplifying when we do things. So, and it's amazing how once you start to reframe the way you think about what you're doing, how you're able to parlay resources in ways that you might not have thought you could. And once that behavior is seen by others in the organization, it starts to kind of happen more rapidly. The others are emerging areas of collaboration, shared collection storage, which is a very important issue for the Art Museum, and we're working together on offsite storage for high-value items. The library has a long history of collection storage offsite for non-high-value items. 3D capture, photogrammetry, you've seen some of the work that's going on. We also at the university have a partnership with a new entry in the mixed reality field, Magic Leap, and we're thinking about ways in which some of the 3D work that we're doing now could integrate into another larger project, and we're collaborating with faculty in computer science in that area. There's also an interest in the anthropology department and in the Low to be looking at some of the new techniques around non-destructive microanalysis of cultural heritage material. So it would be something that we would be working on together to cross all of these different cultural resource collections. And we're looking for the right partner in chemistry for that project to move forward. So now I'm going to just step away from all of that stuff. The second piece is kind of going beyond the university's confines. While we were doing this, we were having a conversation about the gift of a major collection of maps, manuscripts, rare books, Mesoamerican artifacts. There's a lot in this collection. And a portion of the collection was donated to the Library of Congress in 2004 and forms a part of their only permanent exhibit, the Kislak Gallery. And that gift came to the University of Miami, 1,400 items plus, and some smaller number of items to the Miami-Dade College. This is the president of Miami-Dade College, the donor Jay Kislak, and the president of UM, Julio Frank. And so by virtue of this joint gift to two institutions, the donor who really wanted to make sure that the community was exposed to the collection that he had built over all of these years. So the Library of Congress was a logical place to capture an audience, but he wanted a South Florida audience, and he wanted one that would not just be in sort of the ivory tower at the university, but also in a place that was community engaged. So Miami-Dade College is the largest community college in the US, 92,000 student FTE. They have a presence throughout the region, including one that's right near the cruise terminal at the Freedom Tower in downtown Miami. They have a museum studies certificate program, and they wanted to grow their engagement with this type of material. It was a natural desire to have this collaboration take effect. So on the University of Miami side, it's really the libraries in the low are now kind of, we're looking at ourselves as sort of an integrated operation from the perspective of collaboration externally. So there's a lot of synergies between the two right now, and we're just kind of working through them. Again, I'm trying to kind of hold up my end of the bargain on the artistic front, but you'll see some elements from the collection that have come in, an older a wind map, a wind chart. On the lower right, a very interesting map that is referenced by Edward Tufte, who talked about the visualization of information. This is, the map maker here is one of the earliest individuals who began to think about how you could use images to tell a story. So each of these lines talks about the immigration trends in 1858, and the strength or breadth of the line tells you something about the scale of that immigration pattern in that year. And it's showing the from and to locations. An Italian, originally 1554, book on navigation. This is just a very quick sort of a sense of what's in the collection. This is a Kodak-style vase that's in the collection. So, and one of the outcomes of this has been the creation of two Kislak centers in Miami, one at the University of Miami, one at the Miami-Dade College Freedom Tower. Both of them expose parts of the collection. We have complementary exhibits that are involved, and each of us are using, these are the inaugural exhibits that are going on right now, but over time they'll involve different elements of the collection and adjacent collections from the other parts of the holdings of the two institutions. You'll see the photograph here, and I liked the story about bringing young people into the libraries and museum. This is from our gallery, which just opened last week, by the way. And these are our two young children at that event, and they're looking at the digital map display that is in there. We have 3 digital components to the gallery, and these will always be shifting as new. This one in particular, as new maps are added to the exhibit. So I'm going to go back to that line, because I think the 2008 study was interesting, but it really came from an internal perspective, thinking about the goal being operational convergence. And I think that, and this is, I think, in line with what's going on right now at these summits, the goal should really be thinking more about the user's perspective and what the user experience is of all of the things that we do together. They shouldn't really need to know how many of us were involved in. I mean, there should be sort of reference and recognition, but what we're really aiming at is not convergence, but really creating this seamless user experience that understands and learns from what we have and how we present it in a way that they couldn't possibly do if it was more of sort of a siloed approach to what's going on. And so then I'm going to introduce a French word. Thank you very much, merci. And thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to answer any questions that I have. Yeah.
When they go to the place where they can take out the augmented reality, do you have anything they can borrow to do that, like any iPads or anything?
Well, our creative studio does lend technology. So we have iPads and laptops. We also have goggles, the Microsoft HoloLens. We have the Magic Leap lens, which is a new thing. We're lending those out. So people can borrow those items for the project, which is still in its sort of initial phases. We're watching to see how that plays out. There's a lot of collaboration going on with the community and the Historic Preservation Alliance in Coconut Grove to figure out how to mark spaces, because there's supposed to be a physical marker in addition to this digital space. So but we will definitely be supporting it one way or the other. But the goal, I believe, is for it to be something that's more sort of self-sufficient, not forcing everyone to come in and borrow some technology, but really to use what technology or mobile technology they may have access to, whatever that format is, and to take part of that tour. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
So we're moving to our next presentation. Oxford Economics is currently conducting a study on the value of GLAMs commissioned by the Canadian Museum Association on behalf of the Ottawa Declaration Working Group. This is the first time that a study of such magnitude looks at the GLAM sector as a whole. It is scheduled to be released in the fall and was made possible, as Mr. Bertillon mentioned, thanks to the contribution of Canadian Heritage, McConnell Foundation, and Rosamund Ivey. The presentation will be followed by group discussion. They will take place in 3 rooms. For those who have a blue or a red dot on your badge, we would ask you that you go to the rooms in the lower level. You can access these rooms through the doors just at my left. And for the others who don't have a dot, then you remain in the auditorium. And what we would ask is that you come back at 40 minutes later, so that you come back for 3:50. Sorry, I got my time wrong, so let me just calculate a bit. Je sais que ça fait 2h05. Okay, so it's at 3:45, we should be able to take a break. And then we would ask you that you come back at 4:05. And during the break, there will be also a protocol and a memorandum. Sorry, I can't speak. I ate too much. The memorandum of understanding between Wikimedia Canada and Library and Archives Canada, which will be signed at, as again I mentioned, at 3:55. And now let me introduce you to the Oxford team. Andrew Tesler, Head of Consulting, Australasia, Alice Gambarin, Senior Economist, and Hamilton Galloway, Head of Consultancy Americas.
Here we are. Thank you very much, Pascal. It's an honour and a privilege to be here, and we're very keen to present the results, preliminary results, of the work so far. My colleague Alice will be undertaking the first part of this presentation. I'll chip in the middle, and then she'll come back for the end. So, Alice.
Thank you, Andrew. Thanks, everyone. Let me just echo what Andrew just said. We're very pleased to be here, very excited to share some of our preliminary results. Let me go to our first slide. It's a very important remark, what you see at the bottom. These are preliminary results, so please treat them as preliminary. But yeah, we're very excited to be here. As Pascal said, we are undertaking this study, which is really unique for Canada. We're looking at the value of galleries, libraries, archives, and museums at the national level. So I will start out the presentation by showing some results from our survey. So we undertook a survey of just over 2,000 Canadians. Obviously, our sample was representative of the Canadian population. And you see that we split the group of respondents into 3 buckets. We've got the dark blue bar, which shows people who argue they never visited that specific institution. Then we've got the light blue part of the bar, which shows people that have visited within the last 12 months. And then we've got what we call past users. So in the gray bar shows people that have visited the institution, but not within the past 12 months. And we do care about this distinction, and you will shortly see why. Another interesting aspect, another interesting finding of our survey is the extent to which people travel to reach the institution. And again, you will understand very shortly why this matters. You will see that for libraries, which are the light blue bar, people tend to travel shorter distances. And this is, as you might expect, because libraries are all over, and you don't have to travel very much at all to reach your local library. Whereas for museums, archives, and galleries, the distance traveled or the time traveled is much greater. And obviously, this has an impact on the cost of travel. And once again, it will become clear why we care about the cost of travel in a moment. So you see that people who visit libraries tend to spend 0 up to $5 Canadian to reach the institution, whereas people who visit other kind of institutions spend a lot more. So you see there's even a bunch of people who spend over $200 to reach the institution. Another interesting finding of our survey is what we call contingent valuation. Contingent valuation essentially asks people, what is the maximum amount that you would be willing to pay to maintain the GLAM sector? So these are the results, and I think it's very interesting to see they are quite clustered around, so between 16 and 28, so the variation is not huge. However, museums and libraries tend to be the ones for which people are prepared to pay more, at least that's what they say. This chart, I think, is quite interesting because it shows not only the willingness to pay, but the willingness to pay split by the extent to which people have used the institution. So you see that the dark blue bar is the average, but if you look at the non-users, the light blue bar, the non-users are prepared to pay a lot less than the average, whereas recent users, so the gray bar, they are prepared to pay a lot more than the average to maintain the sector. And a final result that I would like to draw your attention to is the health and well-being, excuse me, the health and well-being impact of GLAMs. We saw this morning as well. So we do tend to find a result which is well established in the literature. That is, people who attend cultural or heritage institutions tend to report higher levels of well-being. I think the most striking result here is the volunteering part. So you see, this is the difference between the dark blue and the light blue shows the extent, the probability of people of reporting having volunteered in the last 12 months. And you see there is a huge gap between people who did visit GLAMs over the past 12 months and people who reported to not having visited GLAMs. So this is something we will investigate a little further in our group sessions later. So here now we got Andrew Tesler to present the preliminary results from our travel cost models. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Alice. So that's great, and that's a lot of interesting descriptive stuff. What do we do with it all? Where do we go with this? So the first thing we did was look at museums and galleries and use what's known as a travel cost approach. And the travel cost method is basically looking at, well, what do I have to give up to get to these GLAMs, or in this case, museums and galleries? What do I have to sacrifice, if you like? And travel is often a method used along with entry fees, and that allows us to calculate how much people are paying, but also what's known as a consumer surplus, not just what they're paying, but how much more they'd be willing to pay. Economists love consumer surplus, and so this, how much more would they be willing to pay, the consumer surplus, is a key to this approach to valuation. So we have the example, okay, I might be willing to pay $30 in travel costs, but I only have to pay $5. My consumer surplus, my profit, if you like, is $25. So we developed these models, these travel cost models, to measure this. And we did this from various sources, from museums and galleries. We had some fine participation from museums and galleries across the country. They're listed there. People from BC, New Brunswick, Ontario, several within the Ottawa region, as well as the MA. And we measured how much time and money it took visitors to get to these museums and gallery using a Google Maps algorithm and the data provided to us along with some secondary source data. So those are the grim facts about the methodology. What does that mean? So we love curves, us economists, so we drew up a demand curve based on this information. And we said, well, okay, you know, some people are paying very little to get to these museum galleries. Some people are prepared to pay a lot. And we looked at how they responded to different prices. People far away, there's not so many coming, but they're willing to pay a lot. People close by, there's lots and lots coming. They're not paying too much. And that allows us to model what's known as a demand curve using an equation. And so the area under that demand curve is what we're interested in. It's the consumer surplus. It's how much I'm willing to pay, you know, above and beyond what I do pay. So it's basically a behavioural model that we estimated from the data. And so all that's well and good. So what can I use this for? What does it mean? Well, just imagine that somehow it became more expensive to get to museums and galleries, this example. Maybe it cost another $50 to get to these museums and galleries. What would happen? What would occur? You know, based on the responsiveness from the data we obtained, the so-called elasticity that economists love to measure, we can see what would happen based on that model. So we have something like 3.2 million people currently attending. If prices increased $50 or it became harder such that it was equivalent to a price increase of $50, and those museums reduced their provision or they moved away, we would lose this so-called consumer surplus area 1. Those people would stop coming. It's just too much to come. The costs outweigh the benefits of going. We would lose area 2 because the people who still do come, 400,000 or so, have to pay more. So their profit, if you like, their consumer surplus is reduced. And so we're left with area 3 in terms of value. Well, that's what happens when we start to, if you like, hack away at our glams, start to reduce the number of glams, start to make it more difficult to get to them, start to increase the prices, maybe reduce the subsidy and so on. Thankfully, that's not the case, but that counterfactual shows you what could happen, and it shows you how the value is measured under that curve. So the use value of Canadian galleries and museums, we found the average value of each visit was about $34, and with 45 million or so visits, according to the latest data, to museums and galleries, we came up with a consumer surplus value of $1.5 billion. All well and good. Museums and galleries, great stuff. What about archives? Subject dear to my heart. Much more difficult to get information about archives, but we did get some good data from New Brunswick. We also developed what I like to call the super model, the national model, based on the survey results we did. And combining those two, we get about a consumer surplus of $85 per visit, or $243 million nationally. Now, without going into details, though archives data isn't very plentiful, archives visitors are really determined people, it would seem. You know, there's much fewer of them, but they're determined to get to these archives. They love them. So that's very interesting. There's other work out there we're trying to get from Yale and so on, that looked at Canadian archival visits. It's tough, but that's why it's interesting. I like the harder ones. Okay, so what about libraries? Well, we also developed some information based on 4 libraries. We also developed a supermodel because, again, the library information was there. It's not as plentiful as the museum and gallery information. And so we got something like a consumer surplus per visit of $16. So what does this mean? It means that, okay, people are prepared to pay, but it's not surprising the consumer surplus value per person is lower because there's lots and lots and lots of libraries. Even so, because there's lots and lots of libraries, and we're just looking at Culk at the moment, we get a consumer surplus value of $1.3 billion. And we'll tabulate all these values in a moment, so don't worry too much. So that's consumer surplus, well and good, and you can say, but there's more to life than just visiting these libraries and the archives and galleries. I care about this stuff. It's important to me. I never go, but you know what? I'm happy they're there. I want to be part of a society that supports this. So this is what we call non-use value. And economists talk about non-use value really in 3 categories. It's existence value. I never go, I'm happy it's there. Bequest value. Whether it's there or not, I want to leave it to future generations. And option value. You know what? I might visit that archive one day, but maybe not, but just keep it there just in case. And so these non-use values were measured for people who had not visited in the last 12 months or had never visited. We found their average valuation of $71 per person, or $2.2 billion once you add up the number of Canadian residents over 15. And you're still saying, well, all that's well and good, but what about this thing called the internet? Remember that? So we had a look at some of the internet data from the survey, and you can see there that we looked at various portals. And some of this is, in fact, a bit misleading because it doesn't look at frequency, but just portal entry. But websites are still an important portal for entry. Catalogues, particularly for libraries and archives. Facebook is a big one. Twitter, Instagram, the others less so. And people more and more we are finding are interacting using social media. Not all of this is picked up in the official statistics. That's why it's so important to do the survey and say, well, hang on, there's more to life than just some of the official statistics are reporting. And okay, so online assessment was done, again, using a consumer surplus concept. And to cut it short, we looked at the time spent online. How much time did people spend online? Again, it's a way of measuring resources, and economists talk about, well, how do we do this? How do we get these demand curves? All great stuff. If you want to survey literature, welcome to it. And so, just moving on a bit, we found something like 1.5 billion in terms of online benefits using the methodology we adopted, which is basically, again, to cut it short, a consumer surplus methodology. You really want the details. That's a graph which explains how we did it. Just looking at the area above what I actually pay, it's what I would be prepared to pay for that online access. It's not what I pay, but what I would be prepared to pay above and beyond that online access. So, okay, that's all great stuff. Where does this leave us? Well, we add everything up in a cost-benefit analysis. We add the revenue that GLAMs earn. We add the use value, our lovely TCMs. We add the non-use value, which you just saw. People are prepared to pay above and beyond what GLAMs, what users pay. The online usage, the total benefits. There is these nasty things called costs, because we have to pay for all this, society has to pay. And that gives us a cost-benefit ratio and net benefits. What does it look like to date? Well, these are prelim estimates, so these are not final. We're still working on identifying sources of value. But the CBAs range from 2.3 to 3. And yeah, I think, there's probably some more work to do there, but they're quite robust compared to some of the international literature. Some individual libraries and so on have quite high ones, but that's quite common for the individual libraries, for example. They have high ones. At national level tends to be a bit more modest. So that's where we end up. But there's still a fair bit of range to those estimates, so we're working on refining those. Alice, do you want to?
Yeah, and I'll just conclude by showing you some. So as I said, we don't have time to go through all of the findings from our survey. There are many. But we do want to draw your attention to one last aspect, what we call the multi-criteria analysis. So we acknowledge, even though we love dollar figures, we acknowledge that we cannot monetize everything. We cannot monetize some of the wider, broader social impacts of GLAMs. So this is when the multi-criteria analysis comes into consideration. What we did was we asked our survey respondents to provide their a grade from 1 to 10 to all of these attributes. And I'm going to read it in English, but feel free to read it in French. So these are community engagement and civic participation, preserving cultural and historical heritage, providing access to resources for research, innovation, and education, protecting the truth, integrity, and social values, impacting quality of life, mental and physical health and well-being, providing inspiration for creativity, and lastly, nurturing identity of marginalized communities and contributing to community cohesion. And these are the 7 attributes we discussed alongside with the LAC and CMA, and jointly came up with these 7. And surely there are a lot more that we didn't include in our survey. So these are some results from the survey, and I would just like to draw your attention to 2 main things. The first thing is, as you can see, on average, people give a grade from 7 upwards to all of these attributes for all of the GLAMs. And this is, I think, pretty impressive. So people do think GLAMs are important throughout all the 7 dimensions that I just showed you, and regardless of the type of GLAMs, they're important. All of these dimensions are important or are perceived as important. The second aspect that I wanted to draw your attention to is that for museums, galleries, and archives, we find that the dimension that is perceived as the most important one is preserving cultural and historical heritage. So that is where the bars reach their maximum. Whereas for libraries, what we find is that the dimension that is most valued is providing access to resources for research, innovation, and education. And I guess this is something that you could expect, and that sounds about right. And we will have the opportunity to discuss all of these dimensions in more detail during the group sessions. So please stay for the sessions. And I'm not sure we have time for questions, or do we? I'm not sure. But yeah, if we don't, we have.
5?
Okay, great. So any questions? No.
No questions? One question.
Well, thank you very much. It was very interesting. Je peux parler en français? Do you have your...
No.
I'm going to be speaking in French, so maybe you need your headsets. Perhaps you could go and get them.
Elements. Je voudrais savoir si vous avez tenu compte de l'âge.
I was wondering if you took into account age and education and geography and life expectancy of citizens in Canada.
And la durée de vie au Canada, how long those people were Canadian.
Life expectancy.
Is that the question?
Yep.
Yeah, so we took into account income, age,
Yeah.
province,
Yeah, and also educational attainment.
education.
Age, you said age.
Yes.
What else?
I don't think we took into account life expectancy
No,
per se.
Okay, any distinction
age.
between English and French?
Yes.
Communities?
It was balanced, yes.
Yes.
80-20, I believe.
Yeah.
Okay. I'd like also to ask you about your choice of museum and libraries. You mentioned the New Brunswick University libraries. I have a great respect for them. I know them quite well. But are they really representative of all Canada?
Well, you're talking about, this is a thing. So we have only a limited library selection so far. So what we did, using the model results, because we also collected a lot of data from the model about where people were going and how much they were spending, we developed these so-called supermodels. So we got an estimate from both, and we took both into account in developing the results to date.
Et le choix des musées, your choice of museum.
But the museum was the same, I think. We had the data we had by asking around for various sources. So that's what it's based on to date, but we're continuing to refine those results. At the moment, it's data-driven based on the results.
I'm not looking at your study with the eyes of Quebec or French, but I was surprised to see that in concerning the museum, you have only one from Quebec, and it's a very good one, a very small one.
Well, we'd love to have more.
Yeah, no,
and we have yet to integrate the national model, so that will have some in there. We'd love to have more. It's just governed by what information museums are collected, which in fact leads on to one of the sessions. To have that data, to get the results, we need the data. So.
I guess, just to make it clear to Jean-Louis and others, we basically took what we had.
Yes.
Correct. Though we are supplementing that,
We would have used more.
but we are
Guys, New Brunswick were like the only ones we got.
correct. But we did supplement it with.
Hoping today to get more.
We'd love to get more, but we have supplemented it for archives in particular with the national model, which is exactly why we did a national survey, to get that data, because we didn't think we would get enough from just asking. But we asked anyway to get as much as we could. Any other questions?
I want to go to the part of your study on the social qualitative impact and say I'm a little disappointed to hear that you can't put greater value on that. And I'm not sure why. What are the roadblocks? Have there not been comparable studies, like in the healthcare sector or others, which have shown, just not an economic impact, but a dollar value on the appreciation of culture and the living culture, and how that improves life?
Yeah, it's a great question. I guess, several responses. So you're talking about the well-being and, yeah. So you've got to be very careful on the one hand. Some people say, don't do that. How dare you debase this with dollar values? Okay, but there are answers to that. Other people say you should do that, and that's something we're looking at based on the survey results. So we're not there yet, but we are looking at it. You also have to be careful about causality. Oh, but these people are just neighbourly anyway, and they just happen to go to GLAMs, So yes, good question. You just need to be a little bit careful about doing it, to be aware of the critiques and so on. But yeah, we're working on it.
Hi, quick question about the graph where you had all the figures, and essentially the one where you had the cost-benefit ratio. I'm just wondering if I'm reading, and this is my own data literacy and going back to my classes in microeconomics, which may have been a bit far off in time, but do those ratio coût-avantage, the RCA, that line, does this essentially mean that for every dollar invested in libraries, it's $3, for example, that people get back? So that's how we read this.
Gross benefits,
bingo.
Gross costs.
Okay, thank you. So that's the value. That's what we're looking for, essentially. The impact.
I'm putting in $1. Bank's giving me back $3, if you like. So
thank you. Thank you.
The social bank.
Andrew, look the other way.
There you are.
Just getting back to trying to measure social value, measuring the social value of these 4 institutions is probably going to be of the greatest value to the people in the room. So I'd just like to suggest that when you're worrying about causality, that when we're looking at social impacts, sometimes it's really better to think about how an institution contributes to well-being, as opposed to there being a direct causal relationship, because there are too many other external factors at play to draw a straight line between those two things. But I think that if we could find a way to talk about how unbiased libraries, for instance, are making a huge contribution to people, to senior citizens, for instance, who are in danger of being isolated as they get older and that sort of thing. I mean, that is where the real good stuff is.
Understood. I mean, some of it is also captured by these broader engagement metrics we've used. We didn't try and quantify per se. So the MCA, if you like, the multi-criteria analysis. Someone is saying, well, what beyond these dollar values do you measure? And again, there's critiques about, oh, but hang on, you're double counting because some of this is included in non-use value and so on. But it's a good point, as long as you're aware of the critiques, because we're always aware of the critiques. I always play devil's advocate and saying, come on, Andrew, that's ridiculous, it's double counting. Go for those critiques, and then you can get somewhere. But it's a great point. It's the kind of feedback we're looking for.
Are you going to be introducing additional methodologies in addition to what we're seeing here, or are you just looking for more data for the existing methods?
Probably 2 at the moment, but happy to discuss.
Okay.
We done?
Thank you. Just want to remind, thank you. Thank you very much. I guess I just want to remind some of you of a few things. These are preliminary results, and that was important for us to present them today, so we would also raise awareness that there is a study going on. And as Andrew mentioned, it's very important to be able to gather that data. It's not always easy, and sometimes even the data that we gather is confidential. We cannot, relay it. But we hope that today, actually, by talking to you and having those group discussions, we'll be able to gather more data, look at it in a different way. And also these group discussions and this presentation today, as we said, it's preliminary results, so it's not the final report. And all the information we will gather through those breakout sessions, and subsequently when you'll come maybe to us with some data sets that we can use, we will definitely integrate that. The report is due to be released in the fall, so we have also, we had planned to have parts of the summer to be able to finalize it, and that's why we wanted to make sure that we would present it to you as early as we could. And that being said, then I would ask the people who have the little blue dots to go to the little blue room downstairs, which is actually not downstairs because, well, for me it's downstairs, but I'm already down. So, and then in the blue room, we'll be discussing communicating the value to the customers. In the red room, we'll be discussing the value to the policymakers. And in the auditorium, we'll talk about measuring value. And the importance of you being in those rooms, in those different rooms, is that we can come back in une session plénière. Où est-ce qu'on pourra mettre tout ça ensemble et pouvoir écouter.
And we're going to be putting all of these results together in a plenary. And with Mr. Tesler, I'll be here to remind you of what's been discussed. Mr. Chris Kizin and Francesco Magnanello will be in the different rooms, and therefore you'll be able to discuss with them as well. Thank you very much.
3:50. And then we'll be back at, not 3:50, 3:50, and we'll be back at 4:10, and the signature of the MOU is at 3:50. Thank you.